Captain Jake Morrison stared at the readings on his screen and felt his blood turn cold. The research vessel New Frontier had been conducting routine scans near Jupiter's moons when the sensors picked up something impossible. Energy signatures, unlike anything in human databases, were approaching the outer edge of the solar system at incredible speeds. "Lisa, come look at this," Jake called to Dr. Lisa Park, his chief scientist and longtime friend. She floated over in the low-gravity section of the ship, her dark hair tied back in the practical style all space crews preferred. Lisa examined the data and her face went pale. "These readings don't match any known technology. The energy output is massive, Jake. Whatever is coming our way is bigger than anything we've ever built." Commander Ryan Bell pushed off from the navigation console and joined them. His military training kicked in immediately as he studied the approaching signatures. "How long until they reach Earth?" Jake ran the calculations twice before answering. "At their current speed, less than 6 hours." The three humans looked at each other in silence. They all understood what this meant. First contact was happening, and it wasn't the peaceful meeting that scientists had always hoped for. Ships this large moving this fast toward Earth could only mean one thing. "Send a priority message to Earth Command," Jake ordered. "Tell them we have unknown vessels approaching the system." "Large vessels?" Ryan moved quickly to the communications array. Within minutes, he had established contact with Admiral Susan Brooks at Earth Defense Headquarters. Her image appeared on the main screen, her gray hair pulled back severely and her blue eyes sharp with concern. "Morrison, what's your status?" Admiral Brooks asked without preamble. "Admiral, we're tracking multiple large objects approaching Earth. Their technology appears far advanced beyond our capabilities. Estimated time of arrival is 5 hours and 43 minutes. The Admiral's expression didn't change, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. "Are you certain these are artificial constructs?" Dr. Lisa Park stepped into view of the camera. "Admiral, the energy signatures are clearly technological in origin. The power levels suggest vessels several kilometers in length, possibly larger." "Understood. Return to Earth immediately. We're calling an emergency session." The screen went dark and the three crew members began the process of turning their research vessel toward home. Jake had served in space for 15 years, but he had never felt the emptiness of the void quite like this. Somewhere behind them, unknown ships were bearing down on humanity's homeworld. The journey back to Earth took 4 hours. During that time, the approaching vessels became visible to Earth's deep space telescopes. The images that came through the communication channels made Jake's stomach clench with fear. The ships were enormous, dark structures that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in perfect formation, hundreds of them, each one larger than Earth's biggest space stations. Stranger still, they appeared to be organic in nature, like living creatures rather than mechanical constructs. As the New Frontier approached Earth orbit, Jake could see the planet's orbital defense platforms powering up their weapon systems. The platforms had been built after the asteroid scare of 2089. Massive installations bristling with railguns and missile launchers. Against these alien ships, they looked like toys. President Helen Carter was addressing the world when Jake's ship docked at Luna Station. Her voice carried across every communication channel on Earth and its colonies. "Citizens of Earth, we are facing an unprecedented situation. Unknown vessels have entered our solar system. We do not yet know their intentions, but we are prepared for any possibility." Jake, Lisa, and Ryan transferred quickly to a military transport heading for Earth. They watched through the viewport as the alien fleet took position around Earth's orbital space. The ships didn't attack, but their mere presence was more intimidating than any weapon. Then the aliens made contact. The transmission came simultaneously to every communication device on Earth. Television screens, computer monitors, radio receivers, even personal communication devices all received the same signal. The being that appeared was unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Ambassador Vextar stood nearly 3 meters tall, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. His eyes were large and completely black, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that seemed to echo across space itself. "Beings of the third planet, I am Ambassador Vextar of the Corvani Empire. For 1,000 years we have brought order to this galaxy. We have civilized 847 worlds, each contributing to the greatness of our empire." Jake felt a chill run down his spine as the alien continued speaking. Your species shows promise as laborers in our great work. You are adaptable, resilient, and capable of surviving in various environments. We offer you the same choice we have offered to all intelligent life. Surrender peacefully and serve the Empire, or resist and face extinction. The alien's image seemed to look directly at each viewer as he delivered his ultimatum. You have 72 hours to decide. Choose wisely. The transmission ended, leaving Earth in stunned silence. Jake's transport landed at the United Earth Defense Headquarters just as emergency sessions were beginning worldwide. He, Lisa, and Ryan were immediately escorted to a briefing room where President Carter, Admiral Brooks, and General Kevin Hayes were coordinating humanity's response. What do we know about their capabilities? President Carter asked as soon as the three officers entered. Lisa pulled up the sensor data on the room's main display. Their ships appear to be partially organic, which explains why our sensors had trouble detecting them initially. The energy output suggests weapons capable of cracking planets. General Hayes leaned forward. What about their numbers? We count 437 ships, Ryan reported. Each one could carry thousands of troops, possibly tens of thousands. Admiral Brooks studied the tactical display. Our orbital platforms might be able to damage a few of their smaller vessels, but against their main fleet, we have no realistic chance of victory in conventional warfare. President Carter walked to the window overlooking the capital city below. Millions of people were going about their daily lives, unaware that their freedom hung in the balance. Have any of the other worlds they mentioned ever successfully resisted? She asked. Lisa shook her head. According to their transmission, they've conquered 847 worlds over 1,000 years. The mathematics suggest they've never failed. Then we'll be the first, President Carter said quietly. Admiral Brooks stood up sharply. Madam President, with respect, the odds against us are impossible. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. A fight would mean the extinction of our species. And surrender means slavery, President Carter replied. I've read the historical accounts of what slavery does to a people, Admiral. Some things are worse than death. General Hayes nodded slowly. The President is right. If we surrender, we cease to be human in any meaningful sense. We become tools for an alien empire. Jake found himself speaking before he realized it. There's something else to consider. If we surrender without a fight, we tell every other species in the galaxy that resistance is hopeless. But if we fight, even if we lose, we might inspire others. President Carter turned back to the group. Then we're in agreement. Earth will not surrender. The next 72 hours would determine the fate of humanity. The 72-hour deadline ended at exactly noon Earth Standard Time. President Helen Carter stood before the assembled world leaders in the emergency bunker beneath Geneva, her face calm despite the weight of what she was about to do. Every major news network carried the signal as she prepared to address not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. Ambassador Vextar and the Corvani Empire, she began, her voice steady and clear. Humanity has considered your offer. We reject it completely. Earth is not for sale and humans will never be slaves. If you want our world, you'll have to take it from us. The transmission ended, and across space aboard the Corvani flagship, Ambassador Vextar stared at the communication device in genuine confusion. In 1,000 years of conquest, no species had ever refused the Empire's generous offer of servitude. He immediately contacted the High Command. Supreme Commander Thekvar, the humans have made an unprecedented choice. They have refused surrender. The Supreme Commander's image appeared on the screen, his scaled features twisted in what might have been amusement. Refused? Are you certain you explained the alternatives correctly? Yes, Supreme Commander. They understand that resistance means extinction, yet they choose to fight. There was a long pause before Thekvar spoke again. How curious. Perhaps these humans will provide interesting data before their inevitable destruction. Proceed with standard subjugation protocols, but record everything. The Council of Sciences will want to study this aberrant behavior. Vextar ended the communication and turned to his fleet commanders. Begin the invasion. Show them what resistance costs. The first Corvani assault ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars. They were smaller than the capital ships, but still massive compared to anything humans had built. Each one carried 1,000 soldiers and enough firepower to level a city. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the Orbital Defense Station Armstrong as the enemy ships approached. His small fleet of human vessels looked pathetic compared to the alien armada. But he had orders to engage. All ships, this is Morrison. We know the odds, but we also know why we're fighting. Make every shot count. The space battle began when Admiral Susan Brooks gave the order to fire. Earth's orbital platforms unleashed everything they had, railgun slugs and nuclear missiles streaking toward the alien fleet. Some found their targets, causing minor damage to the organic hulls of the Corvani ships, but their return fire was devastating. The aliens used weapons that seemed to bend reality itself, energy beams that ignored conventional shielding, missiles that phased through armor before exploding inside their targets, and most terrifying of all, some kind of field that simply made human ships stop working. Jake watched as the platform Geneva went dark, its lights flickering out as some alien weapon drained all power from its systems. The station was still intact but completely dead, drifting helplessly in space with 5,000 crew members trapped inside. Morrison, this is Brooks. Fall back to secondary positions. We need to buy time for the ground defenses. Jake wanted to argue, but he could see the tactical display. Half of Earth's space-based defenses were already gone, and the aliens had barely begun their attack. All remaining ships retreat to Luna orbit. We'll regroup there. On Earth's surface, the real war was just beginning. Marine Colonel Steve Parker stood in the command center beneath New York, watching as alien landing craft descended on every major city simultaneously. The creatures that emerged were unlike anything in human nightmares. The Corvani foot soldiers were a mixture of different species, all of them conquered peoples now serving their masters. Some walked on two legs like humans but with extra arms and natural armor plating. Others skittered on multiple limbs or floated above the ground using technology that defied physics. All units, remember your training, Parker broadcast to his forces. They may have better weapons, but this is our world. Make them pay for every street. The first major battle took place in downtown Los Angeles. Pilot Lucy Chen led a squadron of atmospheric fighters against a Corvani landing ship the size of a skyscraper. Her pilots knew they were outmatched, but they also knew that millions of civilians were counting on them. Red Squadron, hit them fast and get out. Don't try to dogfight these things, Lucy ordered, as her fighters dove toward the alien vessel. The human aircraft were primitive compared to Corvani technology, but they were small and fast. Lucy's squadron managed to damage several of the alien ship's weapon ports before enemy fighters responded. The Corvani pilots were skilled, but they fought with the arrogance of a species that had never faced real resistance. Lucy exploited that arrogance. When Corvani fighters tried to match her aggressive maneuvers, she led them into the path of her wingman's missiles. When they attempted to use their superior speed, she used the city's buildings as cover, forcing them to slow down or crash. This is Red Leader, she called to ground control after shooting down her third enemy fighter. They're good, but they fight like they've never lost a battle. We can use that. Meanwhile, in a research facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Amy Rodriguez was making discoveries that would change everything. She had managed to recover pieces of a crashed Corvani scout ship. And what she found surprised her. General Hayes, "You need to see this," she called to the military liaison assigned to her project. General Kevin Hayes arrived to find Amy standing over a partially dismantled alien device. "What am I looking at, Doctor?" "Corvani technology," Amy replied, excitement clear in her voice. "And it's not as advanced as we thought. It's different, yes, but not necessarily better. Look at this power coupling." She pointed to a crystalline structure that pulsed with soft light. They use biological components in their technology, which makes it incredibly efficient. But it also makes it vulnerable to things they've never encountered. "What kind of things?" Amy smiled grimly. "Human things. Our computers use different principles than theirs. Our weapons work on physics they've apparently never studied. We're so primitive compared to their usual enemies that our technology doesn't make sense to them." The war raged for weeks, and slowly, something unprecedented began to happen. The Corvani forces, accustomed to quick victories against demoralized enemies, found themselves bogged down in brutal urban warfare against humans who refused to surrender. In Chicago, Marine Corporal Danny Williams became a legend when he single-handedly held a bridge against 50 Corvani soldiers for 6 hours. When his ammunition ran out, he detonated explosives that brought down the entire structure, taking himself and a dozen aliens with him. His final transmission was heard across the globe. "Tell my mom I died free," he said, and then the bridge collapsed. The story of Danny Williams spread through the human resistance like wildfire. Other soldiers began showing the same defiant courage. Civilian populations refused to cooperate with Corvani occupation forces. Even when threatened with death, humans continued to resist. Ambassador Vextar found himself filing reports that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Corvani casualties were mounting. Worse still, the invasion was taking far longer than anticipated, and resources that should have been used for other conquests were being consumed by this one stubborn planet. Supreme Commander, he reported during his daily briefing, human resistance remains strong. They continue to fight despite massive casualties. Our psychological warfare units report that they cannot break human morale. Tekvar's image flickered with what might have been concern. How is this possible? Have you offered them better terms? They refuse all negotiations, sir. They claim they would rather die than serve. For the first time in his long career, Supreme Commander Tekvar felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt crept into his thoughts as he considered the implications of what Vextar was telling him. Continue the operation, he ordered finally, but increase the monitoring. The Council needs to understand what makes these humans so different. Neither Corvani commander realized that their reports were being intercepted by the very resistance they were trying to crush. Dr. Lisa Park, working with equipment salvaged from destroyed alien ships, had cracked their communication codes. She was learning things about the Corvani Empire that would soon change the course of the war. The aliens had come to Earth expecting an easy victory. Instead, they found something they had never encountered in 1,000 years of conquest. A species that simply refused to be conquered. 6 months had passed since the Corvani invasion began, and across the galaxy something unprecedented was happening. Reports were reaching the farthest corners of space about the humans who refused to surrender. On worlds that had been enslaved for centuries, conquered peoples were beginning to whisper about the impossible resistance on Earth. Dr. Lisa Park worked deep underground in what had once been the subway tunnels beneath London. The city above lay in ruins, but below, the human resistance had built a network of laboratories and command centers. She stared at the decoded Corvani transmissions, scrolling across her makeshift computer screen, and what she read made her heart race with excitement. "Jake, you need to see this immediately," she called to Captain Morrison, who had become the de facto leader of Earth's remaining military forces. Jake approached, his uniform dirty and torn from weeks of underground warfare. "What have you found?" Lisa pointed to the alien text on her screen. "The Corvani are having problems on other worlds. These reports mention unrest on 17 different planets. The subject species are questioning their loyalty to the Empire." "Because of us?" "Because of us," Lisa confirmed. "Our resistance is inspiring others. But there's something even more important here. I've been analyzing their technology for months, and I think I understand how their empire really works." She pulled up another screen showing complex diagrams of Corvani ship designs. "Their power isn't just technological, Jake, it's psychological. They've maintained control for 1,000 years by making everyone believe they're invincible. No one has ever truly tested their limits because no one has ever really fought back." Captain Morrison studied the data with growing understanding. "You're saying they might not be as strong as they appear?" "I'm saying their strength comes from the fact that nobody has ever forced them to show their weaknesses. Look at these casualty reports from our battles. They're losing soldiers and equipment at rates they've never experienced before." Meanwhile, in the ruins of Tokyo, Commander Ryan Bell was discovering the same truth from a different angle. He had been leading guerrilla raids against Corvani supply convoys, and the pattern of alien responses was revealing something important. The Corvani military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and quick surrender. They had no experience with prolonged resistance campaigns. Their soldiers, drawn from dozens of conquered species, were skilled but programmed for specific types of warfare. When humans used tactics that fell outside their expectations, the aliens struggled to adapt. "Red Team, this is Bell." Ryan spoke into his radio as he watched a Corvani patrol from his hiding place in the rubble. "They're following the same routes again. Same patrol schedules, same formations. They don't know how to deal with unpredictability." His team struck fast, destroying the alien patrol with improvised explosives and captured weapons. But more importantly, they recorded everything. The footage would be broadcast across the resistance network, showing other humans that the mighty Corvani could be defeated. On the other side of the world, in what remained of New York, Colonel Steve Parker was making an even more significant discovery. His forces had captured a group of Corvani slave soldiers, members of a species called the Xantharians, who had served the Empire for 300 years. The Xantharians were tall, humanoid creatures with pale gray skin and large eyes that seemed to hold ancient sadness. They had expected to be executed after their capture, but Parker had decided to try something different. "Why do you serve them?" Parker asked the captured Xantharian leader, a being who called himself Kethvar. "We serve because resistance is impossible," Kethvar replied in heavily accented English. "The Corvani are eternal. They cannot be defeated. Yet here we are, defeating them every day," Parker pointed out. For the first time in 3 centuries, Kethvar felt something he had forgotten existed: doubt about Corvani superiority. "Your resistance will fail. It always fails. Has anyone ever tried as hard as we have?" Parker asked. "Have any of the conquered species ever fought for as long as we have?" The question hung in the air between them. Kethvar had no answer because the answer was no. Every other species had surrendered within days or weeks. The humans had been fighting for months, and their resistance was growing stronger, not weaker. While these revelations were unfolding on Earth, the effects of human defiance were spreading across the galaxy faster than the Corvani High Command had anticipated. On the industrial world of Vector Prime, Corvani overseers noticed that their crystalline entity workers were moving more slowly, completing tasks with less efficiency than usual. On the mining planet Gel Corvash, entire shifts of enslaved Aquarian laborers were calling in sick with mysterious ailments that prevented them from working. The Corvani medical teams could find nothing wrong with them, but productivity continued to fall. Most disturbing of all, on the fortress world of Corvani Prime itself, members of the ruling council were beginning to question decisions that had gone unquestioned for centuries. Supreme Commander Thekvar found himself facing criticism from other high-ranking officials for the first time in his career. The human operation was supposed to be completed in standard time, Council member Zextal pointed out during a heated session. Instead, it has consumed resources for half a year with no resolution in sight. "The humans are an anomaly," Thekvar replied, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Once we understand their behavior, we can apply that knowledge to prevent future problems." Or, suggested another council member, "we could simply destroy their planet and move on to more profitable ventures." The suggestion sparked fierce debate. Some council members wanted to end the expensive Earth campaign immediately. Others worried that destroying Earth would send the wrong message to other conquered species. If the mighty Corvani had to resort to planetary destruction to defeat one primitive world, what did that say about their invincibility? Back on Earth, these debates were unknown to the human resistance, but the effects were becoming visible. Dr. Amy Rodriguez, working in her underground laboratory in the former NORAD facility, had noticed changes in Corvani military tactics. "They're becoming more cautious," she reported to General Kevin Hayes during their weekly briefing. "Their attack patterns show increased concern for casualties. They're pulling back from engagements they would have pressed home months ago." "What does that mean for us?" General Hayes asked. "It means they're learning to fear us," Amy replied. "A species that has conquered hundreds of worlds is beginning to worry about losses against primitive humans. That's not just a military victory, General. That's a psychological revolution." The truth of Amy's words became apparent when the next major battle erupted over the ruins of Berlin. Pilot Lucy Chen, now leading a mixed squadron of human and captured alien aircraft, engaged a Corvani battle group that was attempting to destroy a resistance stronghold. The alien pilots fought differently than they had at the beginning of the war. Instead of the aggressive, overwhelming attacks that had characterized early battles, they used cautious defensive tactics. They seemed more concerned with avoiding losses than achieving victory. "This is Red Leader to all units," Lucy broadcast as she maneuvered her hybrid fighter through a cloud of debris. "They're scared. I can see it in how they fly. Press the attack." Her pilots responded with the fierce determination that had become humanity's trademark. The battle raged for hours, but when it ended, the Corvani had withdrawn. For the first time since the invasion began, the aliens had retreated from a fight they could have won. Word of the Berlin victory spread through the resistance network and beyond. Across the galaxy, enslaved species heard the impossible news that the Corvani Empire had been forced to retreat by a primitive world that should have fallen in days. On 17 different planets, Productivity continued to decline. On 43 worlds, small acts of sabotage began appearing in Corvani facilities. On 112 conquered worlds, populations that had accepted slavery for generations began to remember what freedom had felt like. Ambassador Vexitar filed his report that night with growing unease. The human resistance showed no signs of weakening, and worse, their example was beginning to inspire rebellion across the Empire. What had begun as a simple conquest was becoming something far more dangerous. The first real challenge to Corvani authority in 1,000 years. As he finished his transmission to the High Command, Vextar found himself wondering something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. What if the humans were right? What if the Empire could be defeated? The thought terrified him more than any human weapon ever could. The revolution began on a cold morning on the mining world of Jelkorvash, when an enslaved Aquarian named Velthara refused to enter the tunnels. For 300 years, her people had worked the deep mines without question, their natural ability to breathe underwater making them perfect for the flooded lower levels. But on this day, something had changed. "I will not go down," Velthara announced to the Corvani overseer. "My children deserve to see the sky." The overseer raised his weapon, expecting immediate compliance as had happened countless times before. Instead, every other Aquarian worker stepped forward to stand beside Velthara. Within minutes, the entire mining operation had ground to a halt. Similar scenes were playing out across dozens of worlds as news of human resistance continued to spread through the galactic underground. The impossible had become reality. A primitive species was not just fighting the Corvani Empire, but actually winning battles against them. On Earth, Captain Jake Morrison stood in the command center that had been built in the ruins of what was once the Pentagon. Dr. Lisa Park had just finished decoding the latest batch of intercepted Corvani communications, and the news was better than anyone had dared hope. "Jake, look at this," Lisa said, pointing to her screen. "Rebellion reports from 47 worlds now. The Corvani are having to divert entire fleets to deal with uprisings instead of conquest operations." Commander Ryan Bell joined them, fresh from a successful raid on a Corvani supply depot. "It gets better. We captured some of their military personnel and they're willing to talk. Turns out morale in the Corvani military is at an all-time low. Don't they?" Captured soldiers had revealed something crucial. Many species within the Corvani Empire were only loyal because they believed resistance was impossible. The human example was proving that even the mighty empire could be challenged, and that knowledge was spreading like wildfire. On the industrial world of Nexus 7, the crystalline entities had stopped producing weapons for the Corvani war machine. These silicon-based beings had been enslaved for over 4 centuries, their natural ability to manipulate molecular structures making them perfect factory workers. Now they were using those same abilities to sabotage their own production lines. The Corvani response was swift and brutal. Supreme Commander Thekevar ordered massive crackdowns on all rebellious worlds, but the Empire's resources were already stretched thin by the ongoing Earth campaign. For the first time in its history, the Corvani military was facing a multi-front war against its own subjects. Meanwhile, in the hidden bunkers beneath the Australian outback, Dr. Amy Rodriguez was making the breakthrough that would change everything. She had been working with technology recovered from crashed Corvani ships, trying to understand how their faster-than-light communication system worked. "General Hayes," she called excitedly, "I think I've figured out how to hack their communications network." General Kevin Hayes hurried over to examine her work. Amy had connected human computers to salvaged Corvani equipment, creating a hybrid system that could intercept and even send messages through the alien network. "If this works," Amy explained, "we could coordinate with resistance movements across the galaxy. We could turn this from isolated rebellions into a unified uprising." The first test transmission was sent to the Aquarian rebels on Jelkorvash. Within hours, they received a response that made the entire command bunker erupt in celebration. The message was simple but powerful. "Humans of Earth, you have given us hope. We fight with you." Word of the communication breakthrough spread quickly through Earth's resistance networks. President Helen Carter, now operating from a mobile command center that moved daily to avoid Corvani hunters, authorized the creation of what would become known as the Liberation Network. Using Amy's hybrid communication system, human resistance leaders began making contact with rebel groups across the galaxy. Each conversation revealed the same truth. The Corvani Empire was far more fragile than anyone had realized. On the fortress world of Tek Malar, a group of enslaved Xantharian soldiers led by Kethvar had begun secretly sabotaging military equipment. Kethvar had never forgotten his conversation with Colonel Steve Parker, and the humans' questions had planted seeds of doubt that had grown into outright rebellion. For 3 centuries, we believed the Corvani were gods, Kethvar transmitted to Earth during one of the secret communication sessions. The humans have shown us they are merely tyrants with advanced weapons. The psychological impact of these revelations was devastating to Corvani authority. Species that had served the Empire for hundreds of years were beginning to remember their own cultures, their own dreams of freedom. On world after world, the carefully maintained order was breaking down. Captain Morrison coordinated the growing resistance from his underground command post, but he knew the real heroes were the ordinary humans who refused to give up. Pilot Lucy Chen had trained dozens of alien pilots in human combat tactics, creating mixed squadrons that could match Corvani forces in battle. Colonel Parker had established training camps where former Corvani slaves learned guerrilla warfare techniques. The irony was not lost on anyone. Humans who had never left their own solar system were teaching ancient civilizations how to fight for freedom. The Corvani High Command was in chaos. Council sessions that had once been formal ceremonies became heated arguments about how to handle the spreading rebellion. Some members demanded the immediate destruction of Earth to end the example of successful resistance. Others argued that such an extreme action would only prove to the galaxy that the Empire was weak. Ambassador Vextar found himself in an impossible position. His reports to the High Command grew more desperate with each transmission. The Earth campaign that should have been completed in days had now lasted over a year, consuming enormous resources while inspiring galaxy-wide rebellion. Supreme Commander, he reported during one particularly difficult briefing, human resistance has evolved beyond simple military opposition. They have become a symbol of hope for every enslaved species in the Empire. Supreme Commander Thekvar's image flickered, with barely controlled rage. Then we must eliminate the symbol. Prepare the planet-killer weapon. The decision to destroy Earth represented the ultimate failure of Corvani's strategy. In 1,000 years of conquest, they had never before needed to resort to planetary annihilation to defeat a single world. The very fact that they were considering it proved that their myth of invincibility was shattered. But Vextar hesitated before implementing the order. Something had changed in him during the long months of fighting humans. He had begun to understand what drove their resistance, and for the first time in his life, he questioned whether the Empire's cause was just. "Sir," he said carefully, "destroying Earth might have consequences we haven't considered. The other rebellious worlds will see it as proof that we can only win through genocide. It might make the uprisings worse, not better." The Supreme Commander's eyes blazed with fury. "Are you questioning my judgment, Ambassador?" "I am questioning whether we can maintain an empire built on fear when that fear is no longer effective," Vextar replied, surprising himself with his boldness. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Vextar to contemplate the magnitude of what he had just said. Around him, his own crew began to show signs of the same doubt that was spreading throughout the Empire. The human example was infectious, and even the Corvani themselves were beginning to question their right to rule. On Earth, the Resistance leadership received intelligence about the planned planet-killer attack. Instead of despair, the news brought a grim satisfaction. The fact that the mighty Corvani Empire felt threatened enough by one small world to consider destroying. It entirely proved that the human resistance had already won the most important victory of all. They had shown the galaxy that tyrants could be defeated, and that knowledge could never be destroyed, no matter how many worlds burned. The rebellion reached its breaking point when Ambassador Vextar made the decision that would reshape the galaxy forever. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, he looked at the planet-killer weapon charging its devastating power and realized he could no longer serve an empire built on fear and oppression. "All ships, this is Ambassador Vextar," he broadcast on an open channel that reached not just his fleet, but every resistance cell across the galaxy. "I am officially defecting from the Corvani Empire. Any ship that wishes to join the liberation forces is welcome to do so." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Nearly half of the Corvani fleet around Earth suddenly turned their weapons on their former allies. The civil war that had been brewing beneath the surface finally erupted into open conflict. On Earth, Captain Jake Morrison watched in amazement as alien ships battled each other in the space above his planet. "Lisa, are you seeing this?" Dr. Lisa Park monitored the communications channels as defecting Corvani forces coordinated with human resistance leaders. "It's happening everywhere, Jake. Reports are coming in from dozens of systems. The Empire is tearing itself apart." The final assault on Corvani Prime began 3 months later. Captain Morrison commanded a massive fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships flew alongside vessels from 47 different liberated worlds, each species contributing their unique technologies and fighting styles to the cause of freedom. The Xantharian fighters, led by Kethvar, had been modified with human guerrilla tactics that made them unpredictable in battle. The Aquarian submarines could operate in the liquid methane seas of the outer planets, striking Corvani installations that had been considered unreachable. The crystalline entities had learned to modify their molecular manipulation abilities for warfare, creating weapons that could break down enemy armor at the atomic level. President Helen Carter, now serving as the elected leader of what had become known as the Galactic Liberation Alliance, addressed the combined fleet before the final battle. 2 years ago, humanity faced extinction rather than slavery, she said. Her voice carried to every ship in the massive armada. Today we fight not just for Earth, but for every world that has ever dreamed of freedom. We are no longer just humans or Xantharians or Aquarians. We are the voice of liberty itself. The battle for Corvani Prime lasted 18 hours and became the largest space engagement in galactic history. The remaining loyal Corvani forces fought with desperate fury, knowing that defeat would mean the end of their 1,000-year empire. Commander Ryan Bell led the assault on the planetary defense grid, his mixed squadron of human and alien fighters threading through defensive fire that could vaporize capital ships. "Remember what we learned about their tactics," he broadcast to his pilots. "They expect conventional attacks. Give them chaos." The human approach to warfare had infected every species in the Liberation Fleet. Instead of the formal battle lines that had characterized galactic conflict for millennia, the attacking forces used unpredictable swarm tactics that overwhelmed Corvani defenders. Pilot Lucy Chen, now commanding an entire wing of liberated fighters, broke through the outer defense perimeter and began her attack run on the Empire's Central Command facility. "This is for Danny Williams and every other human who died free," she said as she released her weapons. The command complex, seat of Corvani power for 1,000 years, erupted in flames that could be seen from orbit. On the planet's surface, General Kevin Hayes led the ground assault with forces that represented dozens of species united in common cause. Colonel Steve Parker coordinated with Xantharian commandos to capture the Imperial Palace, where the Supreme Commander had made his final stand. The fighting was fierce, but the outcome was inevitable. The Corvani military, built for conquering helpless worlds, could not adapt to fighting an enemy that refused to follow conventional rules of warfare. Supreme Commander Thekavar was found in his throne room, surrounded by the bodies of his personal guard. When the liberation forces reached him, he looked at the mixed group of humans and former slaves with something that might have been respect. "You have destroyed an empire that lasted 1,000 years, he said to General Hayes. "No," Hayes replied. "We liberated a galaxy that should never have been enslaved." The formal surrender took place in the ruins of the Imperial Palace. Representatives from every liberated world gathered to witness the end of the Corvani Empire and the birth of something entirely new. Dr. Amy Rodriguez, now serving as the Chief Technology Officer for the Liberation Alliance, had spent months planning for this moment. The challenge was not just military victory, but creating a new system of government that could unite dozens of different species without repeating the mistakes of the Empire. "We propose the Galactic Free Alliance," President Carter announced to the assembled delegates, "a federation where every world governs itself, but all stand together against tyranny." The proposal was unanimously accepted, with Ambassador Vextar serving as one of the founding members. His knowledge of the former Empire's structure proved invaluable in creating systems that could prevent any one group from dominating the others. The healing process began immediately. Worlds that had been stripped of their resources were given aid to rebuild. Species that had forgotten their own cultures were helped to rediscover their heritage. The vast slave labor camps were dismantled and replaced with voluntary cooperation agreements. Captain Morrison found himself serving as the first human ambassador to the new galactic government. Standing in the council chambers that had been built on the site of the former imperial palace, he reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. 2 years ago, we were just a research crew studying Jupiter's moons, he said to Dr. Lisa Park, who now headed the Alliance's scientific cooperation program. Who would have thought that refusing to surrender would lead to this? Lisa smiled as she watched delegates from 47 different worlds working together to solve problems that had seemed impossible under the Empire. Maybe that's the most human thing of all. Jake, we don't know when to quit. The final ceremony took place on Earth, where a monument was erected to commemorate all those who had died fighting for freedom. The names of every resistance fighter, from Danny Williams to the Aquarian miners who had started the first rebellion, were carved into a crystal wall that would stand forever. Children from dozens of different species played together in the gardens around the memorial, their laughter a sound that had not been heard in the galaxy for 1,000 years. Above them, ships from the Free Alliance patrolled the stars, not as conquerors but as guardians of liberty. Ambassador Vextar, now an old being who had spent his remaining years working to undo the damage his empire had caused, spoke at the dedication ceremony. The humans taught us something we had forgotten, he said to the gathered crowd. They showed us that freedom is not something that can be given or taken away. It is something that lives in the hearts of all thinking beings, waiting for the courage to demand it. The monument's inscription was simple, written in the languages of every liberated world, in memory of those who chose death over slavery, and in honor of the species that refused to kneel. As the ceremony ended and beings from across the galaxy returned to their homes, one truth echoed through the stars. The Corvani Empire had ruled for 1,000 years by making their subjects believe that resistance was impossible. It had taken just one species, standing alone against impossible odds, to prove that freedom was always possible for those brave enough to fight for it. Humanity had set out to explore the stars and instead had liberated them. In the end, the greatest discovery was not new worlds or alien technologies, but the simple truth that tyranny could always be defeated by those who refused to accept it. The galaxy was free, and it would remain free as long as beings remembered the lesson Earth had taught them, that no matter how powerful the oppressor, there is always hope for those who dare to resist.